today. We live in the age of the independent game developer. Sadly, AAA games have fallen in quality over the past few years because they wanted to please everyone but ended up pleasing no one. Now today, we're taking a look at one of the great independent game successes, Shadowrun Dragonfall. But before we get into the game itself, let's first take a look at its history.
Shadowrun began life as a tabletop RPG released in 1989. It was set in a cyberpunk world wherein magic had returned, and standard humans began mutating into various differing species such as orcs, trolls,
Human trolls, of course, worship the great god Trollolol, as of the 30th edition at least,
and elves and dwarves. In this world, corporations control the world. Oh, and did I mention, dragons returned as well, and they are not weakling Skyrim dragons, oh no! These dragons make Alduin look like a bloody spawnling. These dragons are also super intelligent as well, and they actually control many of these super powerful corporations, including a cyberpunk version of the legendary Krupp.
Now, if only a dragon actually ran Umbrella, then they'd probably stop wasting all their money on mutant monkeys and instead spend their money on that bloody super soldier serum that Wesker used so well.
Everything in this world is neon-colored and dark and dreary, similar to the world of Neuromancer or Blade Runner. Since this is an 80s future, cybernetics, termed cyberware in universe, is very popular, and people can be outfitted with robot arms and legs and various other bits. The game itself is centered around teams of individuals called Shadowrunners, and they run the shadows to make money by stealing from the massive corporations. The game was massively popular when it was released, and still endures to this day.
Like with many popular tabletop RPGs, this particular RPG got numerous video games released for it. The two most notable and the two most enduring were the video games released for the SNES and the Genesis. Both of these games were actually top-down RPGs, and they worked fairly well. Now, the game we're looking at today, Shadowrun Dragonfall, is actually made in the same vein as those two games. So now, let's take a look at Shadowrun Dragonfall's development.
Shadowrun Dragonfall initially began life as DLC.
No, not DLC, the bane of gaming. But actually, ladies and gentlemen, it wasn't really DLC. In other, better eras, Shadowrun Dragonfall would actually be something along the lines of an expansion pack.
Shadowrun Dragonfall was released as an expansion pack in February of 2014, and then expanded to become its own standalone game in September of that same year. The Shadowrun story begins with Shadowrun Returns. The lead designer of Shadowrun Returns was Jordan Wiseman, who in turn was the original creator of the Shadowrun tabletop RPG. He wanted to create a true Shadowrun experience after the rather lackluster and quickly forgotten Shadowrun first-person shooter that was released on PC and Xbox 360. After getting the license back from Microshaft, he went to a variety of studios, and they of course passed on the project, since it couldn't be simplified to the point where it was just one big QTE. So, Wiseman opted to create a Kickstarter for it in 2012, and in just 28 hours, he met his initial funding goal of $400,000. Eventually, he would go on to raise over $1 million. And one of the awesome rewards for backing the game was the ability to get exclusive access to a mission that bridged the gap between the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo games that were released back in the 90s. Eventually, this mission would be made available to everyone. The game would sell so well and become so popular that they were able to create two expansion packs, Shadowrun Dragonfall, which we're taking a look at today, and Shadowrun Hong Kong, that was released afterwards.
Now initially, I had absolutely no interest in the Shadowrun franchise, and when Shadowrun Dragonfall was released, I really didn't even care about it. It wasn't until about a year after its release that a friend of mine recommended that I give Shadowrun Dragonfall a try, and when I did, I was not disappointed in the slightest. So now, let's finally take a look at the awesomeness that is Shadowrun Dragonfall.
Shadowrun Dragonfall is very much a classic RPG, and is what one would have called at one time a CRPG or computer RPG. And one can tell this by the controls for the game, as it makes heavy use of the mouse. In fact, you can play the entire bloody game, and I have, with the mouse alone. And if you have to enter a string of numbers or a name into a terminal, you can use the keyboard. Hell, the game even recognizes the 10 key.
The 10 key, ladies and gentlemen, the implement of the true PC gaming master race.
The game utilizes a top-down perspective with what one would call fog of war. Essentially, if it's not in your character's line of sight, it does not show up on the screen. Out of combat, you control your player avatar and can have him move about at will. Most times, when you're exploring the main hub, you will be alone, but on mission you will have other party members follow you, and you can make use of their skills, and you can have up to 3 party members at any one time. The game does have some minor exploration elements, and it is not entirely linear in its level design, but owing to its indie origins, the game world is not all that large. But the game still encourages you to explore everywhere and to talk to everyone, and you will have various benefits for doing so. Combat for the game is turn-based, and it's actually pretty bloody fun. You can control each of your party members, and they don't just do things autonomously. And each party member will have their own strengths and weaknesses. And really, when you actually create a Shadowrunning crew, you need to choose skills that will actually be useful. Meaning, you don't want to not bring along a decker, because if you don't, you won't be able to access many of the computerized systems that'll be found throughout a level. Also, you want to make sure you have a medic, because you will indeed get shot up, and you need somebody who can actually heal. This, of course, gets into the concept of the player classes. There are numerous player classes to choose from, and all of them come from the original Shadowrun tabletop RPG. You can, of course, create your own class, and I've had varying levels of success with this. Really though, there's a lot of classes to choose from, and each one is actually pretty bloody fun to play as. But unlike in other RPGs, whatever class you choose will actually have an impact on the game. There are certain areas in the game where you need to have a certain skill level to do something. Like if you want to break through a wall, you better have a good strength level to actually break through it. Or if you want to deck something, or hack into something, as it would normally be known, you actually have to have the ability to deck it all, as some player classes do not actually come with that ability. Like in the classical RPG, Baldur's Gate, your player character's look is chosen from a small number of heads and bodies that can range from douchey looking to awesome. Leveling is done via karma points. They are gained by completing quests and things of that nature, and there are a large number of skills to choose from. And the game also has a representation of the Matrix!
Whoa, I know. Kung Fu. No, not that one. This Matrix, ladies and gentlemen, is the futurist equivalent of the internet.
The gameplay for this part of the game is more or less the same as regular combat. It's turn-based, but you can only fight in the Matrix if you have the skill requirements and equipment. Graphically, the game is quite good, as it requires the use of a wetware coprocessor.
Sadly, these coprocessors are not really used these days. Really, most modern games just use the CPU or the GPU for graphical complexity. But really, many of the most enduring games require the use of a wetware coprocessor, and we're much better for it.
If you haven't figured it out yet, you may need to go to the library to upgrade your own. A wetware coprocessor is, of course, your brain! And this game requires that you both use it and your imagination to get the full experience. On a pure graphical level, the game is graphically basic. The game uses the Unity engine, and it uses it well. As everything, despite not having super amazing EA graphics that cost $10,000 per pixel, although in all reality it's probably more than that, still look good and are highly detailed. The hub and various buildings have a nice cyberpunk quality to them, and the characters have nice little elements to them as well. But graphically, most of the game is mental. The game uses descriptive language to make the player imagine what is going on versus having everything lovingly animated with 3D. Yes, in the modern era, showing, not telling is something people prefer, but ultimately the human imagination is much more powerful than even Frostbite 3. And I found myself getting much more into this game than many other graphical powerhouses, because having an event described and then having my imagination turn it into a mental image immersed me into the game far more than if I saw an FMV with Kevin Spacey. The game does not have any voice acting, which once again works quite well, as the developers can not only use more money on, actual game design, but you, the player, can use your imagination to give the characters in the game any voice you want. Because one's imagination is not limited by money and actor availability. Music for the game is absolutely excellent as well, and has a very nice cyberpunk feel to it, and is one of those soundtracks that you can listen to for hours and not get tired of it, as none of the beats really insist upon themselves, and the music as a whole is there for immersion into the world. The game was released on Android and iOS as well, And thankfully, this PC version is excellent. And there are numerous graphical options, and the game can indeed be played on even the weakest of systems. There are some frame rate drops here and there, although this can be excused as even modern EA games have this same problem and they have multiple times the budget.
And now on to the most important aspect of this game, the story.
The story for the game is quite simply transcendent. The setting is pure cyberpunk goodness with all the elements that one would want. The plot for Dragonfall is nothing short of exquisite. The game starts off with you, a rookie Shadowrunner, breaking into a mansion to steal some data from a data vault. As you would expect, the break-in goes really bad and you barely escape with your lives. The game starts off very well paced. You don't immediately get into this world-shattering adventure to save everything. Rather, you have to piece together, bit by bit, just what is going on in the world around you. Really, this game does not hold your hand in terms of story. You have to really dig deep to figure out everything that is going on, and it is that much more satisfying for it. The characters in this game are exquisitely well written. Sure, the game doesn't have voice acting or lovingly done 3D facial animations, but its descriptive language can really bring these characters alive. These characters have extensive backstories, and many of them are indeed very tragic, and can actually bring a tear to your eye at times. These characters are indeed gray in every sense of the word. They're not good, they're not bad, they are just people, and this game pulls no punches with its character backgrounds. Put simply, this video game not only has novel quality writing, but it has some of the best turn-based gameplay I've played in a very long time.
And so that is Shadowrun Dragonfall. It is an RPG that knows what its fanbase wants and gives it to them. And I cannot recommend it enough. And so I am GeneralLotz, wishing you good Shadowrun Hong Kong and good Shadowrun Returns, or whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed my review of Shadowrun Dragonfall, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue to bring you these great game reviews.